Okay, so now we'll have a discussion of simple interest. And with simple interest, interest is actually the amount that you pay to borrow money. So with simple interest, that amount is based only on the total amount of money you borrow for the entire length of the loan. So regardless of how many what duration of time you borrow the money for, the interest calculation will always only be based on the initial amount that you borrowed. So, with simple interest, the interest or the amount of money you pay is going to be equal to the principal, which is the amount of money you borrow, multiplied by the interest rate, the rate of interest, which is represented as a decimal, multiplied by the time. Now, the thing is, the interest rate and the time have to be using the same units of measurement. So, for instance, if the interest rate is given as a yearly interest rate, then time has to be in years. If the interest rate is given as a monthly interest rate, the time has to be in months. If the interest rate is given as a weekly interest rate, the time has to be given in weeks. For the most part, unless otherwise stated, you're going to assume that interest is being given in years. So the interest rate will be a yearly interest rate unless otherwise stated. All right, now the other thing is we're going to be using ordinary interest. We're going to be calculating our interest using ordinary interest, in which each month has 30 days and there are 12 months in the year, which makes for a total of 360 days, and we know there are actually 365 and a little bit more days in a year, but we're going to stick to the we're going to simplify it. We're going to simplify it by saying each month has 30 days, and each year has 12 months. All right, now that being said, let's go ahead and look at some problems. So for example, if you borrow, let's say $500 for, let's say 9 months at a simple interest rate of, let's say 6%. And since the 6% is just given as 6%, you have to assume that 6% is 6% per year. So this is the annual interest rate, the yearly interest rate. So, simple interest rate of 6%. And let's see. The first question I want to ask is, how much interest will be paid? So basically I'm asking you to find I'm asking you to find the amount of interest paid. So the first thing you want to do, we need to find the principal. The principal is the amount of the loan, or the amount that you borrow. So in this case, the principal, the amount that we borrow, you borrow $500. So 500 is the principal for my loan. It's the amount I'm borrowing. Then we move on to the interest rate. Remember, I said the interest rate is going to be given as a decimal. Even though it's given as a percent here, when we use it in this formula, it has to be written as a decimal. So the interest rate, if the interest rate is 6%, to change that to a decimal, we write it as 0.06. So here we have the principal, we have the rate, and the last thing we need is the time. Now the time is going to be measured in years because the interest rate was given in years. Unfortunately, the problem gives us the time in months. So we have to figure out what fraction of a year 9 months represents. So for the time is going to be the 9 months out of the total of 12 months that make a year, which when you reduce it, 3 goes into that 3 times and 3 goes into that 4 times. So the time is going to be 3/4 of a year, 3/4 of a year. And all we have to do now to calculate the interest, I is plug all these numbers in. So the principal is 500. The rate is 0.06. And the time is 3/4. As a decimal, that's 0.75. So let's go ahead and find out how much interest we're going to pay. So we'll have the $500 times the 6%, which is $30, times 0.75, or 3/4 of the year, 9 months. And this tells me that the interest is going to be $22.50. So that's how you calculate interest when you're dealing with simple interest. It's just interest equals principal times rate times time. You have to remember though that the time has to be given in the same units as the interest rate is, and if not otherwise stated, the interest rate is going to be given in years, a yearly interest rate. So that means time, for the most part, should be written in years. All right, so that's the first part. I found out that interest is equal to $22.50. For the second part, part B, how much will be repaid at maturity? So maturity means the end of the term of the loan. So once, like for instance, if it's a 9-month loan, if it's a 9-month loan, what I'm asking is how much money will have to be repaid at the end of 9 months? Well, you borrowed $500, and your interest that they're going to charge you is $22.50. So the amount that has to be repaid, the accumulated value of your loan is going to be the $500 that you pay, the $500 that you borrowed that you now have to repay, plus the $22.50 that they are charging you for borrowing that amount of money. So it turns out that at maturity, if you borrow $500 at 6% for 9 months, you'll be paying back $522.50. So that is the amount that you would have to repay. All right, let's take a look at another example. Now let's say we borrow $437, and at the end of, let's say, at the end of 15 months, we pay back $510, and that's in 15 months. My question is, what rate of interest did you pay? Okay, so this is a different kind of question. I'm giving you the amount that you borrowed, which is the principal, and I'm also giving you the accumulated amount, the amount that you pay back at the end of the loan. So let's see, in order to figure out how much interest you're paying, well, they lent you this much money, but you gave them back that much money. So in order to find the amount, in order to find the interest, in this case, I'm going to take the $510 that I paid back, and I'm going to subtract off the $437 that I actually was loaned. So let's see, that's going to be $73. So we paid $73 in interest. $73 was paid in interest, but I'm not asking for the amount of interest. I'm asking for the interest rate. So what I found is but what I need is R, the interest rate. So let's go ahead and find the interest rate by just plugging everything into this simple interest formula. Well, I know the interest amount is $73, that's I. And that's equal to the principal, the amount of money that I borrowed, $437. That's the principal times the rate. Well, the rate is what I'm looking for, R. I'm looking for the interest rate, multiplied by the time. Well, when I give an interest rate, just like when I am given an interest rate, it's usually given as an annual interest rate. So because I'm expecting to get an annual interest rate for R, I'm going to use years to measure time. So this is 15 months. So I have to turn that into what fraction of a year that is. So that's 15 months out of a 12-month year. So it turns out that we're going to use 15 over 12 for the value of t. So here I have I is equal to P times R times t. Let's see what we get here. So first I'm going to calculate the right hand side here. That's 437 times 15 over 12. And I get 546.25 multiplied by R, and that's equal to the $73. Now to find R, I just divide both sides by $546.25. So we'll have 73 divided by $546.25. And I get that R is equal to 0.134 approximately. This is an approximation. I rounded this to 3 decimal places. So that's the interest rate. And now the actual percentage for the interest rate is approximately, that would be, to change that decimal to a percentage, I move the decimal twice, and that turns out to be 13.4%. 13.4%. So here's another kind of question. You can be asked to find the interest. You can be asked to find the interest rate. Really, pretty much you can be asked to find any one of these 4 values. You just have to be given the other 3 values and understand the meaning of them. So that is how we're going to look at this simple interest formula. There's one other thing though. In these examples, we've been assuming that the interest is paid at the end of the term of the loan at maturity. We're assuming that you're given money and then you have that money for a certain period of time, and then after that period of time, not only do you pay back the money you borrowed, but you also pay the interest. There's another kind of loan called a discount note, and for a discount note, you actually pay the interest when you're given the money. So as soon as you're given the money, you take a portion of that money and pay the interest. United States Treasury notes, Federal Reserve Treasury bills, Federal Reserve Treasury bills are these kinds of notes. They're discount notes. So let's see. Let's look at one. So let's say we have a $500 loan. $500. But we're borrowing this $500 using a 10% discount note. So we're using a 10% discount note to borrow $500 for a period of 3 months. Okay, the first question I'm going to ask is determine the interest. Now notice I didn't say determine the interest rate. The interest rate would be R. I'm asking you to determine the interest, which is I. So here's what we do. The interest is going to equal the principal, which is the amount we're borrowing, $500, multiplied by the rate of interest, which is 10%, but we write that as a decimal, multiplied by the time. And the time in this case, once again, this 10% is 10% per year, 10% annually, but this is given in months. So we have to figure out what fraction of a month, or what fraction of a year 3 months represents. That's 3 over 12. And here you have it. This will give us our interest. So this calculation yields, let's see, we have 500 multiplied by 0.10, multiplied by 3 over 12, which is actually, what, 1/4. And here I get $12.50. So $12.50 is the interest. That's the first part. The second part, that means that when you go to borrow this $500, to get the $500, you immediately have to pay $12.50. Now you can either go with the $12.50, or you can take the $12.50 out of the amount of the loan. So the net amount that you actually receive, part B, what is the net amount received? So what is the net amount received? Well, in this case, since you borrow $500, but you had to immediately pay $12.50, the amount that you actually receive is the difference of the two, and the difference of the two is $487.50. $487.50. So this is $487.50. That's the amount that you're actually going to get from the bank. So you're getting a $500 loan, but it's at a 10% discount. So you're actually only going to be given $487.50 because you're charged the $12.50 of interest up front. All right? So here's the last question now. What is the actual rate of interest for this loan? So let's find out. Let's do a part C. Part C. So what is the actual rate of interest? Well, let me see. The interest that I paid is $12.50. That's how much I paid. But I didn't get $500 really. I really only got the principal, $487.50. Now I'm looking for the interest rate, so I don't know the interest rate. And it's still for 3 months out of a 12-month year. So 3/12 goes here. So here I'm going to calculate the actual interest rate, which is not actually going to be 10% because I didn't quite borrow the entire $500. So the actual rate of interest, let's see. So we have this $487.50, and we're multiplying it by 3/12. And then here on the right-hand side, I get $121.88. Actually, it's 875 R, which is equal to $12.50. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 121.875. So let's see, we will do $12.50 divided by 121.875. And I get that the R is equal to 0.10, let's round it to 3 decimal places, 0.103. So that's approximately. And as a percentage, this interest rate is actually approximately 10.3%, a little bit more than what it seemed. So there you have it. This is how you calculate a discount note. So you have questions as you go through about treasury notes, United States Treasury bills and treasury notes, and this is how you're going to do the calculation because those are discount notes.